Good afternoon. We had a little technical problem there, so sorry. Uh, Welcome to the CAD-1 BD Mackey joint presentation, Navisworks Search Sets. My name's Stan Henney with CAD-1, and I have with me today Brian Mackey from BD Mackey Consulting, well-known and very prominent Revit and VDC, BIM consulting firm here in the Denver area and really across the nation anymore. And congratulations to Brian and Desi for really building a good organization. And so with that, we want to get started today. We'll go through the housekeeping. We just got done with Revit Radio, and that's always a little wild and crazy. And then we go into our little bit more serious webinar now. So with that, most of you have been on a go-to meeting before, so you know the procedure. If you want to remove the console so you can see the whole screen, hit the orange and white arrow. Hopefully most of you can hear us, and you're using either mic and speakers or telephone. Can you hit the raise your hand button and let us know if you can hear us? We kind of like to do a little bit of a sound check here. Looks like one of you can. There's a few of you. Good. It looks like most of you can hear us, so thank you. And most importantly, if you would like to ask a question, type it into the question box, and we will try and get it answered as in close to context as we possibly can, and try and get all your questions answered by the end of the day anyway. We've got quite a few new names here today, and that's good to see. Every time we do a webinar, it seems like we pick up a few more people, and the interesting thing is we're getting people from all over the world anymore. I think that's kind of cool on our webinars.
It is a good thing. And like Stan said, the big thing is ask your questions. If it comes up, ask it, because we like to answer those in a timely manner. And if you're listening to this recorded webcast, because yes, this is going to be recorded, then unfortunately you don't get the privilege of asking questions.
Right.
So.
And we do record it. We will have it posted on the CAD-1 YouTube page. Usually it takes 3-4 days, a week or so, so we'll get it up there as soon as we can. So anyway, go ahead, Brian.
We're going to be doing this one in Navisworks. I'm going to be using Navisworks 2015. What I'm going to show you will also work from Navisworks, I don't know, 14, 13, 12, back pretty far. Also found out today that there is a new Navisworks service pack. So if you guys are using Navisworks 2015, they released a service pack this morning, or actually this afternoon. So just thought I'd throw that one out there. So the big thing I want to talk about in this one is Navisworks search sets, because I don't care if you're an architect, a contractor, an MEP, an engineer, any other type of engineer, or just somebody playing around in Navisworks. Search sets are a huge tool in order to get things what's going on. So I'm going to talk about how we can create search sets. I'm going to show the difference between search sets and selection sets. And to do that, I'm going to also show you what the big deal with defined item tools is. And then I'm going to show you how we can get in and import predefined search sets. I'm also then going to jump into, since I have Navisworks managed, I'm going to jump into the Clash Detective just to kind of show you how we can, other ways of using the search set. So that's going to be Navisworks managed specific. But everything else I will show you will work on Navisworks Simulate or Navisworks Manage.
And just so all of you know, there are both Navisworks Simulate and Navisworks Manage are standalone products if you choose to buy them that way from Autodesk. But Navisworks Simulate is a tool that comes in the Building Design Suite Premium. It also comes in Infrastructure Suite Premium as well. Navisworks Manage is the full Navisworks package with the automated clash detection. That's really the big difference, and that comes in the Building Design Suite Ultimate and the Infrastructure Design Suite. I don't know, some of these people might have folks on the webinar might have infrastructure, so that's going to make sure that we cover that. But anyway, go ahead.
No, so I was just going to say, and so just to let you know, anybody can use the tool on that. So before we get started, I do also want to say that I'm going to be basing this on Revit-based projects, because that's what I'm comfortable with. Not to say that this doesn't work with other types of programs you're going to be dealing with. So Navisworks will bring in a plethora of different file types. I don't care if they're AutoCAD, MicroStation, whatever. Search sets are going to work for any numerous types of objects. There'll just be slight nuances you'll have to figure out. But I do know that the majority of our clients are looking at, Revit, etc. So I want to bring it back into the, hey, this is how it can also work with Revit as well.
Exactly.
So a couple things I always like to point out before I really get started in Navisworks. Just by a show of hands, How many people have been using Navisworks? So I want to just know how many people are new to Navisworks, how many people have been using it. So it looks like we're about 50-50. I should have done a poll on that. I didn't think about it. So it looks like we're about 50-50. 50% of you use Navisworks, and some of you haven't. So the couple of things I want to point out, especially when dealing with this in the Revit environment, are the options inside of Navisworks. Because there's going to be a lot of things in here that the default is metric and just some different scenarios when we go through. So in your application menu, and the big green N in the corner, if you want to call that an N, you have your options in the lower right corner of the application menu. So when you start going into your options, there's a couple things you always want to start coming in here and looking at. That's broken down into different, categories, etc. The general, the interface, whatever. Let me come into the interface, and I'm verifying this because I couldn't remember if I updated this in my Navisworks 2015 or not. So a couple things on here is the interface. By default, it comes in meters, so you can change the default to be, feet and inches if that's what you're looking for. If you're joining us from, any other country in the world but the United States, you'll be wanting to leave it as meters. But you can also change it from meters to centimeters, micrometers, whatever type of scenario. Micrometers, I doubt you're going to be doing that, but centimeters, kilometers, whatever you're going to be looking for in that scenario. So you can also change it in that scenario when you're looking at it.
Well, and just real quick, Navisworks is used not only for building projects and civil projects, but it's also used quite frequently in the manufacturing industry to do interference checks and so forth. So that's why you have some of those units of measurement that,
like mils and micro inches.
Yeah, that don't really happen in the building world.
Yeah, I also like the fact that you can display everything in miles.
Yeah.
So that one always cracked me up too. It's the only program I've seen do that. But yeah, so good point. That's what you do have, like micro inches and mils as well. So if you're already using the manufacturing, so good call on that one, Stan. So the other thing here is just there's different options for like selection. If you don't like the blue selection color, etc. We are going to talk about the resolution on selection when we get into this. That'll be back in the ribbon interface as well, so I don't worry about it too much here. But one of the big complaints I always hear people talk about is, gee, how come I can't measure in 3D? Well, it's because you don't have the in 3D box checked. So I always like to check the in 3D box so I can more easily measure. And the big one that I'm going to be getting into for measuring, etc., is you always want to make sure that all of your snaps are checked. I forget what out of the box is. I think snap to vertex isn't, so you can grab edges and vertexes or line vertexes. But anyway, I just like to point those out when you're talking about, in general, Navisworks settings that you might want to look at. The other thing that you're going to have, depending on the type of file you're importing, is there is the Navisworks options for file readers. So it does break it down into all the different file types that it can bring in. So you've got all these versions inside of here. And, you've got them for if you're bringing in from 3ds Max, what are you doing inside of here? What are the units coming in from 3ds Max? What are you going to do if you're using MicroStation files, et cetera, et cetera. So it's got all of those different options inside of there. Again, I did say we're going to be basing this on Revit. So I'm going to go down to my Revit options, which we've been able to bring native Revit files in 14 and obviously now 15. When you're looking at the Revit options inside of here, the one thing I personally don't like to do is if I've got Revit MEP, Revit structure all linked into one building, I don't like to convert it. I like to manually load each building into Navisworks by themselves. I'm going to show you why I like to do that in a little bit, but that's one of the settings that I always uncheck. And then the other thing is, and I like to explain this to a lot of people, is if you're bringing it in a 3D view, which 3D view are you bringing it in? So you'll notice that one of them is called Navisworks, the other is First 3D View, or there's one that just says Ignore Views and bring in all of the 3D content, period. So personally for me, I like to use the one called Navisworks. And what that means is if I go back to Revit and I'm in a little building, any view that has the word Navis in it, it will find and bring that view in. So if I'm in Revit structure, I'm going to go create a Navisworks view, and I'm going to make sure that all of my rebar is set to display in my Navis view, not unobstructed, but as solids. If I'm in MEP, I'm going to make sure I go change the detail level down to fine, so I'm getting all the duct work, et cetera, et cetera. So when you go through and set this up, it's really nice to be able to just have a view, set that view up the way you're going to want to be running your clashes and go through it that way. So I like it that way. That's how I set it up. I know a lot of super large projects, people break it down into areas and they'll have little Navisworks views for area 1, 2, 3. If you're doing that, you're not going to more than likely open the native Revit project. inside of Revit, you're going to go to your add-ins, you're going to go to your external tools, and you are going to export out to Navisworks. So that is something I want to point out, that Navisworks does have a lot of add-on utilities that will allow you to export out of those programs if those programs aren't files you can bring in. And in some cases, if you can bring them in, it will give you the capability to export it anyway. So you might not have a Navisworks utility, but I would check on the Autodesk site, see what Navisworks exporters they have, and there might be one for the particular software you use. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. Okay, so back into the Navisworks world. So got my settings set up. I'm liking the way those are. Just a couple things I always like to point out there. So now what's going to happen in Navisworks, I'm just going to go open my Revit file. So I'm going to go browse to where I have this on my machine. And once I get there, you are going to notice that I can just bring in an RVT file. The one thing I always like to point out when doing this is make sure you have the right file type selected. I don't know how many times in Navisworks it's only set to see like NWF files. I'm looking for, or NWD files. I'm looking for something. Man, where's my file? Why can't I find my file? And it's just simply because I didn't have all file types or a specific file type set up inside of here. So I'm going to go down to my all files. So one thing about when bringing this in as well is if their files are in the same folder, you can bring in more than one file at a time. So I can bring in the structural file, the office mechanical file, and the office architectural file all at the same time. If they are in different folders, I'm going to leave structure out of this for right now. If they are in different folders, you can always just hit open. It'll bring those two files into the current project. And then I can go back and do what's called an append and add files to it. So maybe I didn't have them all in the same folder. That's what happened to me this morning when I was working with a client. So I had to go append each individual file because they store all their files in different folders. So I had to go through and do all of it. And what is nice about what I'm going to show you with search sets and getting these saved is this morning when I actually was working with one of my clients, I did 5 buildings, set up, brought in all buildings from all the consultants, everything lined up nicely, so that was a good thing. In the Revit world, they were all using shared coordinates. And then I was able to import my clash detection and run clashes, and I did 5 buildings, roughly the size of what we're looking at here, probably a little bit bigger. I did all of those in less than an hour. So that's what's really nice is once you start understanding search sets, you start saving search sets, and you start using the import-export inside of Navisworks, you'll be able to generate and save standards that you use often and be able to repeat those from project to project to project. I used to work with a company a few years ago. They did a lot of hotels. They did like, I forget what hotels they did, but did a lot of hotel, like chain hotels.
Hampton Inns.
Hampton Inns, thank you. And I was able to show the Hampton Inn being animated. Okay, that's a new one. I was able to be able to show the Hampton Inns being animated after they did their first standard one within a matter of minutes. So I could bring it in and literally show a construction timeline animation, not accurate to construction scheduling, but just kind of, hey, here's part 1, here's part 2, here's part 3, all within less than 30 minutes on any building they did. So one of those things that once you understand this and get into it, and if you have any sort of standard, you can really start getting into this and blowing it apart. So now you see we brought this in. We've got the nice little Navisworks file sitting here. And a couple things I want to point out is since I did these as 2 separate buildings, notice how I can grab the structural file independent, or excuse me, the architectural file independent of the mechanical file. So that's one reason why I like to do this, is they're independent files. So if I just want to go hide this object, excuse me, I can just say, no, I want to hide, we'll hide the architecture. I'm going to come here, I just want to hide the architecture, so now I'm just looking at MEP. By telling Navisworks not to bring in linked files in Revit, in my mind, you get way more flexibility in what's going on in the scenario. So that's how I personally like to do this. I like to bring them in as separate files. Now, the other thing that's kind of nice about this when you get into it is, like I said, if you didn't have all of them in the same folder, you don't have to do anything crazy. On the open drop-down, you can just do what's called an append. An append just basically says, I'm going to take that Revit file and I'm going to add it to. So I'm just going to bring it in and append this file. And while that's working, I'm going to go back in while that's concentrating and thinking. So one thing that I will point out when you get into this as well, if I go to where this is being stored, you're going to notice that as this is being generated, you're going to see these new file types pop up called an NWC. This is your Navisworks cache file. if you export out of your program, so if I went into Revit and hit export to export to Navisworks, it would have generated the NWC for me. If you open up an AutoCAD DWG, an RVT Revit file, whatever file you open, Navisworks is automatically going to generate the NWC file for you. That's its cache file. That's the communication file between the native authoring software and Navisworks. And what's cool about this is every time you open up the NWF file that we're going to create from this, if it sees that there's a time date difference between the NWC and the native authoring file, it automatically regenerates that for you. The NWF still has the information and the data you've added to the project, but it'll automatically give you the updates through that cache file. So just like to point that out so you're not going, man, what are all these files in there? I only created one Navisworks file. Why do I now have 5 files in there? That's the big difference between what's going on. Okay, so a couple things inside of here. Navisworks 14 and 15, they added the Autodesk rendering. You may or may not like the Autodesk rendering. The one thing I don't like, and this took me forever to figure out, is you can't get out of perspective view if you're in the Autodesk rendering. So if I go back to the Home tab and switch it from Autodesk rendering to not Autodesk rendering, there we go. I should now be able to go into viewpoint and go back to orthographic. Okay, not working for me. I've been in 15. I've only been in 15 a little bit, so some of the stuff might change. Because I wanted to go into orthographic view and show you how the levels, etc., show up. Autodesk rendering is off. I believe that's off. It changed this in 15 on me. I don't want Autodesk rendering. I want it to go away, so I think it's not highlighted. Okay, so I'm missing something in 15. I'm going to have to look at this because I know I was just doing this morning in 14. But so anyway, we're in here. We're in this file. So what's really cool about Navisworks when you get into it is if I start looking at this and I pick an object, over on the left, what's called the selection tree, and I have my selection tree turned on, the selection tree, it automatically takes you underneath the file that object is located, and it tells you underneath the category it's located in and what object that is. So if I just start picking on a window, it's going to switch me over to Windows. If I grab this HVAC unit, it's going to switch me to the MEP model and tell me, well, actually I grabbed the disconnect switch part of the HVAC unit. It's going to tell me that's a disconnect switch, but it's on top of, you know, this feasible 200 amp scenario. So as you grab these things, the project, or excuse me, the selection tree is showing you what you have selected. So for the Revit users out there, extremely similar to the project browser inside of Revit. Hey, here's what you're grabbing, here's what you're looking at. But what's beautiful about this is over on the right, it's then giving me all of these different properties from the authoring tool of what's going on inside of here. So I can actually see that that's the family in Revit. It's called centrifugal fan inline belt drive. It's under mechanical category equipment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these different things inside of here. I can even possibly get to some of the instance properties that were put inside of here. So I can see what the apparent load is, the volume that that's pushing out, et cetera, et cetera. If I grab a wall, I can start seeing a lot of the properties of the wall. Hey, it's this type of wall. It's this X. It's created in phase 2. And just start going through here and seeing what's happening inside of this. One thing that's also cool that you may or may not have depending on your file reader settings is I can see what room this wall touches, or rooms. This wall touches Office 101, 102, Product Library, so it's conveyed and next to all of those different rooms when you start looking inside of there. So it's kind of nice that you get all of the properties that were pretty much embedded into that object into the Navisworks environment. And again, that's going to depend on the file reader, the program you're using, but in the Revit world as well as the AutoCAD world, we can get all the layer properties, block information, etc. out of that data. So it's a really nice feature on what you have when you're starting to look inside of that.
And Brian, I want to stress we are doing Revit because this is what Brian is an expert in. But I know looking at the list here, there's a 2 or 3 of you who use Autodesk Plant 3D. There's some of you, 1 or 2 of you who do use Civil 3D, and there's MEP Revit, there's Structural Revit. There's a whole gamut of people here. So just kind of keep an open mind and look at how you could use this because it all pretty much works the same.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, again, I'm not sure about plant, but I'm assuming it would be the same in plant. But
It does.
if I bring
worked with
AutoCAD
plants,
MEP stuff in, I can see the properties AutoCAD MEP's objects have. If I bring in AutoCAD architecture, again, I can see the properties of the AutoCAD architecture. So if you're definitely using an Autodesk-based platform, it usually is pretty streamlined with it. If you're using something like SolidWorks, you might not get all of the properties you were hoping to get out of it. So again, just depends on the authoring software you're pulling it from. Okay. One thing I also wanted to point out that I kind of forgot to, that I usually point out, is people are like, oh, that's great, but I don't have properties. I don't have the selection tree, the search set. One of the things that I always try to talk about in here is also the workspaces. So by default, when you install it, it comes in with what's called Navisworks Minimal, which means pretty much everything on the sides are turned off, everything at the bottom is turned off. But you can come in here and just say, hey, I want to load the Navisworks Extended. And for the most part, with the exception of a couple tweaks, that's what I've used for the workspace, and it's just going to basically turn on all of these different properties for me. I might have turned a couple off.
Brian, I do want to say, too, that, again, so far, because you have the Simulate Navisworks and the Manage Navisworks, so far everything that Brian has done can be done in either Simulate or Manage. So we're trying to keep this so that as many people as possible can make use of this.
The only thing that I will do later, just to briefly show you, that won't be part of Simulate, will be Clash Detective. Everything else I'm going to show you, you can do Navisworks Simulate, in case that's the Navisworks you have. So with that workspace, just to let you guys know, it's just checking certain tools you have or the certain windows next to it. So I just always like to point that out. Here's what you have. Here's what's going on. I get the question a lot. That's great, but I don't have any of those palettes you have opened up. So I just wanted to show that to you guys. Okay, so we've talked about how I'm selecting things. It's giving me the properties. It's seeing in the selection tree. But if I also open up my sets panel, what's great about sets is we can start creating different types of sets inside of here. So just as an example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just first off grab the structure model, and I'm going to go to the Home tab and say Hide Unselected. So I basically just hid the architecture and the mechanical model, because right now I just want to look at the structural model here. But what I can do is start coming in here and selecting things out of the structural model, and I'm using my control key to select more than one thing. You can also hit the space bar to go right into a crossing window if that's what you wanted to do as well. So space bar will let you go from an individual pick to a selection pick. And I'm just going to, oh, I missed it. So I'm going to try this again. Grab some things here with my control key just to get in and do with this. So what's great about sets inside of Navisworks is I can come over here now and say, hey, I want to save this selection. So this is going to be what's determined as a selection set. And I can say foundations, pour 1, thinking in a contractor world here, right? Then I can come back and grab these objects, not that object, grab this object over here, not that object. And again, it's control to either add or remove from your selection sets. And yes, you can still zoom in, etc. All right, I think I already got that one. No, there's another little one there. So now I'm going to come in here and just save this set and call this foundation pour 2, top 2. And I spelled foundation wrong, but you'll get the point here. If I get my fingers in the right key. Okay, so just going through and setting these all up. I spelled the other one wrong too. So what's great about this is anytime I now want to go back and select those objects, I don't have to manually pick them. I can just click on this set, and it's showing me, hey, here's all the objects in that selection set. Come over here and grab this selection set and say, hey, here's all the objects in that selection set. The downside to this is if I go back into the Revit file and I add in new pieces to the foundations, Navisworks is not going to automatically add those to the set. So when you start getting inside of this and start doing it, selection sets are not live updating. They are static selections. So if the model changes, with the exception of the object being deleted, the set is not going to update. What I like to do is start looking at the properties of certain things. So if I grab an object, I start going to the properties and looking through the plethora of properties I might have. Usually you're going to be looking in the Element tab for Revit-based objects. What am I looking for? Well, I know in Revit, and if you're in AutoCAD, maybe you want to use the layer. I want to grab everything on layer foundations. I want to grab everything on layer foundation wall, everything on layer rebar, whatever. I'm going to look to the Revit category here. What's great about this is you also inside of here have what's called the find items, which looks like at some point in time I closed my find items, so I've got to go back to the the view tab, come to Windows, and turn on my find items. I had accidentally closed it. So with my find items turned on over here, what I'm going to do is come in here and start looking at when I grab this object, what are the properties I see over here? So what's great about find items, I'm going to make this a little bit taller, is this dialog box on the right side of find items is basically going to match what you see in the properties. So for the first column, this first column is what properties tab are you looking for up here? So Navisworks breaks this down in little tabs of the properties. So I want to go to the element tab. Okay. The second column is what is the property column you see on that tab. Well, I want to go look to the category. So I'm going to grab all Revit, in this case, foundations. So I'm going to come down here and grab the category. So I'm going to say I'm going to look to the property of category in the category tab, or in the properties tab. Okay. Then we've got our conditions. Anybody who's ever done conditional statements? I want it to equal this, I want it to contain this, I want it to not equal this, etc. Now I'm just going to say equals, and then I should get a drop down of every object, since I'm saying equals, that in this Navisworks file you see. So I can just say come down here and they equal structural foundations. Now what's cool about this find items down here is I can just say go find all of them, and boom, there's every structural foundation in this project. Even if there were some in the architectural model, which I have hidden right now, it would be grabbing the structural foundations out of the architectural model. What I love about this is once this is done, I can come over here and say, hey, you know what? I want to save this current search. What's great about a saved search is when you do this, this is active. If I go into the structural model and add 500 new foundations, this search is going to find it. Foundations. I spelled it wrong again. So what's great about this is a static selection set. This is a live search set. So this is constantly changing. Every time I pick on that, it's researching the model, the Navisworks model, to see what's changing.
Brian, Cameron asks, please say a little about the scheduling features, especially the Gantt charts. Is there a way to access Navisworks Gantt charts online? And this might be a little ahead of your game, but
a little bit ahead, but I'm going to ask a follow-up so we can do it when I get there. I don't know what you mean by online, Cameron. Can you give me a different, further explanation of that? So that's kind of what I love about this. So I can go through here and start creating search sets. You know, if I grab this, I can say, hey, I want to come in here and search for a structural category of structural columns now. What I love about this too is if I pick on one that I've already had selected, it pulls it up in the find items. So now what I can do is just change it from structural foundations to structural columns, save the search, and call it structural columns. Rename it, struct columns. All right, so we can really quickly just grab this again, change this instead of from structural columns to structural framing. Do a save up here, call it structural framing, etc. The one thing about this that it doesn't do is if that property doesn't exist, that it doesn't allow you to create a search set. And so what I mean by that is if I haven't modeled any structural rebar in my project, it's not going to give me the option to change it to be structural rebar. So when I originally started doing this, I had to basically go into a Revit project and create one of everything. One duct, one conduit, one cable tray, one of everything inside of there. And since 14 and 15 come out, I need to go add a couple things, but I needed to go create one of every type of object so that way I could start creating these search sets. Okay? Why I'm talking about and saying that right now is like, what does it matter if you don't have it in your project? Well, in the upper right-hand corner of the Sets tab, there is this nice little thing called Import Export. What's beautiful about this is I went through the tedious task of creating a search set for every single Revit category. So what I can do now is just import search sets. XMLs, I really thought it was right there in 14, but maybe it's still in 13. Navisworks. So I've got this XML for Revit category search sets. I can hit open. There is every Revit category. Now all I have to do is start clicking, and boom, there's the structural fabric if you had it, structural foundations, framing, columns, rebar, telephone devices. This is every Revit category. So even if you're using ArchiCAD or using AutoCAD and you have standard layers you use, you could create one of these for every standard layer to select all those objects on that layer. This is where the power can really come into play for people using it internally. Now, contractors going to be a little bit harder because you don't know what the architects are doing for layers in AutoCAD. You don't know what they're doing for level naming in Revit. But in the Revit world, categories are categories. People cannot change that. And that's kind of one of the beautiful aspects of this is it is what it is in the Revit world. So really quickly, I can come through here and start doing this. And I'm going to go unhide all on the Home tab. Right, so now you'll see if I just come down here and say, hey, I want to grab walls, boom, I'm grabbing all of the walls, structural model as well as architectural model. So what I love about having this as my default, if I pin open my find items again, what's really nice about this now is I've got this find items for all of the walls. But what I can do is keep this search set and then uncheck the other two categories. So now, notice I had 195 objects found. If I hit Find All now, there's only 13 walls in this structural model. So by default, when you're creating these search sets are searching every model in the file. But if I just pick one model, I can now say, hey, well, I'm going to save this search, and this is going to be a sub-search. Try this again. Okay, I think I screwed something up there. Let me try that. No, search set, category equals walls. I'm going to rename this real quick. I'm going to call this walls. I always put a dash in front of it, so try that again, F2. Dash, walls, structure. It just lets me know that I've got walls underneath the structure. Okay, I can do the same thing for architecture, etc., etc. But what I also love about the Find Items tools, I can go grab, let's say, this wall. And now I can see that it's got a base constraint of first floor. But you'll notice it's kind of weird here. It says level first floor, pound 30. And if I go grab a wall of the structural model, it'll probably say level first floor, pound 256, or whatever the number is going to be. Because that's kind of the uniqueness to that particular model. And you kind of get the same thing with AutoCAD files as well. What's great about this is there are more than just one tab. So I can see that there's a base constraint, and notice on the base constraint it just says level name first floor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go create a new search, and this search I'm going to say this is going to be going off of base constraint. The property I'm looking for is name. The condition I'm going to use is contains, and I'm just going to say contains the word first. Okay. Below this, you have a couple different options on here. You have match character widths. I don't know what that one is. That's new to 15, I'm guessing. But one of them is match case. So I can uncheck match case, so it's not case and space sensitive. So if the architect said first in uppercase and the engineer said first in lowercase, it doesn't matter. And now if I go ahead and do find all, the sad part is base constraint name contains first. Oh, it's nothing in structure. Grab all three models. If I say find all, it's going to find them all through all three files, but it could be finding structural columns base constraint first floor. It could be finding elevators base constraint first floor. So I don't want to do just base constraint of first. I want to do a sub-search. So what's great about this is I can also say searching in the standard tree or in sets I've already generated. So now I'm going to do a sub-search of walls, which is probably going to be the same quantity. But this search is not searching models at this point in time. It's searching searches. So it's a sub-search of a search. So now I can come in here and save this search and say walls. Keep doing that. Rename this. Walls first floor. Then I can do a sub-search walls second floor, walls third floor, etc., etc., etc. And I can really start getting into these search sets. And if you're in an office environment where you guys have standards where you're like, we always call it first floor, we always call it second floor, or not always, usually, first floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor roof, you can start getting into these values, having them set up, so when you just bring a project in, you import all these, every single search set has been created for you. And that's what I did with my one client who was working on the Hampton Inns. The Hamptons, it kind of sounds like I was talking about the Hamptons. When they were creating all the Hampton Inn models, we set this up for their standard for Hampton Inn. They'd do a new Hampton Inn. I would import the searches. I would import a timeline task. Boom, I would be done and good to go. So it's kind of one of those things that if you really start, have some standards. I don't care if it's AutoCAD. I don't care if it's MicroStation. I don't care if you're using Inventor. More than likely, you're using some sort of standard. It could be a material inventor. I'll grab all the aluminum parts, the plastic parts, whatever. You can use the searches to dive into what's going on. Now, once those searches are created, what's great with this is we could use these search sets or selection sets in a lot of different ways. I want to be able to kind of see into the building. So I'm going to go grab my walls selection. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go ahead and say I want to, where is it? Oh, that's right. This is the confusing part now. The part that gets me every time I go to do it. This is your sets dialog. I'm going to unpin that because on your selection tree, it's broken down to standard, compact, properties, and sets. In order to manipulate, you don't go to the sets tab. You go to the selection tree set subcategory. First time I did this in Navisworks, everybody's like, just right-click and rename it. I'm like, man, I can't right-click rename. It doesn't exist. What are you people talking about? Because they were telling me you had to be on the sets panel, and I was on the selection tree panel. So understand that there are two locations the sets are created. To create the sets, you go to the sets panel. To manipulate the sets in the model, you go to the set subcategory of the selection tree. Really confusing. But so what I'm going to do now is come down here to walls, and I'm going to select walls. Again, they're all selecting, but I can right-click. I can say I want to go override these walls, and I want to override their transparency. So now I want all walls to be 50% gray or transparent, so I can see through them. I should be able to see through them. Override item and transparency. And I have a feeling it's because we're in the, we're in the Autodesk rendering, and I don't know why it's not getting me back to, I'll have to look at this. This is a new 2015 feature, but instead of that, let's try going into override item. Let's try overriding their color, and let's say we want all walls to be orange. Again, not working. I guess I should have looked at this in 2015. I'm assuming it's probably a viewpoint and shade. There we go. That's what I was looking for earlier. So I was in render mode, not shade mode. So now I'll go back to walls. I'll override the, actually I'm going to reset the appearance. And then I'm going to go override the transparency and make them 50% transparent again. So now you can see I'm kind of looking through the walls to be able to see what's going on. Okay, so it's one of those nice features that now I can use these sets for things. Maybe I just wanted to turn walls off. I can just right-click on it and say, hey, hide the wall. So now I see everything else, floating doors and windows, but I want to just be able to temporarily see what's going through the project. Okay, so that's where it really becomes a benefit, what's going on. And maybe I'm realizing, oh wait, I didn't want to hide walls. Let me go turn those back on. I wanted to keep this, or just hide the structural walls. So I can come down here and say, hey, hide the structural walls. So you can start determining with those sets, just turn these things on, turn these things off. And again, these are always constant live searches. So if the model updates and the architect adds 200 new walls, that search is going to automatically pick up on those new walls. And that's really where the beauty of this starts to come in and play. The other thing that I really like about the search sets is, let's say you were the contractor, you were still looking at the whole pour condition that I was creating. Well, I'm going to come down here and just grab all my structural foundations, and then I'm going to say, let's go back to the Home tab and hide everything but the structural foundations. So even though I've got these structural foundations sitting here, I'm going to go through and start classifying pours. Much easier to select them in this scenario than in the whole entire model being turned on. Now I'm not seeing the floor. I'm not seeing what's going on. I can just simply grab these and use these tools to help me generate selection sets. So I'm using a search set just to help me manipulate the visibilities to help me control what I'm doing for a selection set. So again, I'll come down here, say save selection. It's going to probably be at the bottom of the selection set 1, and then I could rename it and call this my foundation for 3. Okay, so that's really where the benefit of search/selection sets start coming into play. You can set the stuff, create it. Once you get it created for one project, import all of those, boom, you're good to go. So huge tool. I've got quite a few companies set up using this, and they're just amazed at the amount of speed and productivity they increased by using search sets on this. So the one thing I will say is the import and export does not import or export selection sets, only search. So if I were to go export this out, it would not be getting my 3 foundation pours because those elements don't exist in the new object, so all I can do is use search properties. So I just wanted to point that out as you start getting into it. Okay. The other way that all of these sets can start being used is they can be used in other features. Again, this is still a Navisworks Simulate feature, but one of the things that you can start doing is creating a timeline. So I don't know if anybody's ever done a timeline in Navisworks, but with a timeline, what you can do is you can add a task. You can give the task a name, foundations. And then once you start getting into the task here, and I'm going to hide the Gantt chart. I will get back to it, Cameron. Don't worry about this. You start to lose resolution when you're getting in, all this stuff inside of Navisworks at a narrow monitor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and say foundation, and then what you're going to do is this timeliner is going to allow us to kind of animate some construction sequencing. It's truly set up to here's day 1, here's day 2, here's day 3 type scenarios, or if you do Extreme Makeover Home Edition, here's minute 1, here's minute 2, here's minute 3. You can break it down that well. But what I want to do is you start getting here and say, hey, here's when my start date's going to be. Great. Here's when my end day is going to be. We'll do the next day. So you can start doing start dates, end dates. You can then come down here and say, what is attached to this? So you can click in here and say, right-click on it, by the way, and say I'm going to attach a set, and I want to grab my whole structural foundation set. Structural foundation. Right? Then I could go add a new task, call this one foundation walls, add that task. I'm just going to throw in structural columns. What I do believe you can also do, I think this got added in 15. I haven't tried it yet. You can also drag and drop sets. This is a huge feature in my mind. As you saw, trying to add that set was a pain in the butt. I can't remember if they added that in 14 or 15, but you can just drag. You can't drag it just on there and have it create a task, but once you've added a task, you can grab any of these objects, foundations already being used, and just drag and drop them onto, I don't think there's any other stairs in this file. But again, drag and drop it onto the task, and it'll just add it to it. So that to me was a big, big feature. Okay, so you're able to go through and start setting these. And then what's cool about this, and we don't have a whole lot inside of here, so not much is going to happen. But what you can then do is go say you're going to play this, and it'll show it being animated for the weeks, etc. you've got going on. And probably nothing's going to happen because I really didn't go through and get this set up. Okay? But what is also really great about all of these tasks and sets is this can also be automated slightly as well. So one thing that you can do, and I'm just going to go remove these tasks, is you can link data sources to the tasks inside of Navisworks. So what you can do is if you've got a Microsoft project, you can link what you've done in Microsoft project to Navisworks. If you're using Primavera, you can bring in Primavera stuff. If you're a poor man like me and you don't have the expensive fun software, you can also just grab the CSV file, right? So if I go back into my files inside of here, I'm getting this from 13, you'll see that what I've done is I've actually created an Excel spreadsheet. And like I said, I'm not using this for true date timelines, but I've created an Excel spreadsheet. And what's great about this is all of the names here match my search sets that I've created inside of Navisworks, right? Completely could be wrong, but just so you get the point here. What I've done in Excel is I gave myself a date, then everything else is +7. So every task in my world takes exactly 7 days. So I've just got this. You'll see that this is the end date of that one. So this is +7. This ends on that date, and the next one starts.
None of us could say that Brian doesn't have a God complex with that kind of logic.
Yeah. This is just, proof of concept. So I've got this inside of here. And inside of here, I've also created all of these different columns inside of Excel that will match what happens inside of Navisworks. So these are all properties inside of Navisworks that you can assign to a task. Once I did all of this, I just saved it out as a CSV file. So I'd saved it, then I saved it, exported it as a CSV. So I just have a CSV where there's none of the formulas in there. It's just comma separated values. So inside of Navisworks, I can just bring in CSV. And you'll see what happens here is when I bring it in, I'm going to tell it that CSV has the headings. And then I have to start matching inside of Navisworks task name, display name. So this is the Navisworks column. What header in the CSV file am I going to be matching? So I said row 1 contains headings. I've got to say, hey, task name is going to be equal to task type. No, sorry, task type is going to be equal to task type. And this is why I try to keep it somewhat synchronized. ID is going to be linked to ID, etc., etc. I hate the fact that this dialog box is not adjustable. So we've got, it could be synchronized ID. I don't remember which ID goes. I'm going to link it to both. Then we've got like planned start date. I had planned start date. Planned end date. Planned end date. Actual start date. Actual start. So see, that's why I had all of those columns inside of the CSV file, so I could start coming through if it was something I wanted to do, fill out the CSV file, and then just have it link and come across. I'm not going to worry about the rest of them. I am going to say OK. Task name has got to be, I think that's task type. We're going to link two of them. It should work. Let me open up. Oh, I closed it. So let me open up that CSV file, look at this again, or the Excel file, I guess. Name goes to task. Task type goes to task type. Name goes down. See, that's why I got to look in here. So task name goes to name. That's what it was. So now I'll say OK, and here is my data source. All right, it's telling me it's a data source. It's linked. Here's where it's linked to. However, nothing happened quite yet. What's beautiful about this is I can now go tell it I need to refresh it, which sounds weird, and I will refresh the data source. Once I tell it to refresh that data source, it starts asking me, what do you want to do? Well, I want to rebuild the task hierarchy. And it's saying some of the task fields, they don't correspond. That's fine. But what that did is that now created a task for every single one of those with the dates pre-built into it. Okay? They're also underneath the data source. You can bring more than one data source. Here's this data source. Here's this data source. So if you have different data sources, you can bring these in. What's cool is there's still nothing attached to this. So then what you can do is you can go into, you got to remember where this is because it's slightly different than the older versions. I think it's a rule. I just got to remember where the rules are. Auto attach using rules. There it is. So I come here and say auto attach using rules, and I want to match timeline or tasks from column name with sets of the same name. So I have these sets over here. They happen to match this. So again, this is me just taking what I did for search sets, associating search sets to a CSV. Now I can just say OK, check it, hit apply rules, boom. Now all of those are search set set up, went through, they're done. The one thing that's also cool about this is even though I have a search set for conduit, if conduit doesn't exist in the model, it doesn't associate it to a task. So there's a find items. The find items equals 0. It doesn't associate it to a task. So it's actually kind of cool. Okay, so kind of making sense, getting set up inside of there. Then when that's done, I can go to the Simulate tab, hit play, and you'll now start to see from my very simplistic file here, oh, I have everything hidden. So let's go back to tasks. Hold on, everything's hidden right now. Let me say unhide all. Now let's go to Simulate and hit play.
I was going to say, that's really boring.
That's pretty boring. You can kind of start to see, granted, this is not broken down by level 1, level 2, etc., but this is a pretty basic understanding of, hey, here's what's going on, and here's how this model's being set. So literally, I set that CSV file up in about 15 minutes. I did the search sets, took me a little bit longer, but now we can start coming through and getting this information set up, etc. Okay. To answer one of Cameron's questions is inside of the tasks, you can also display a Gantt chart. So more like what people are used to in Microsoft Project. You see mine are all week 1, week 2, week 3, etc. But in the Gantt chart, what you can start doing, and it's all the way at the end, is start coming through and just stretching this out. No, this should actually take a little bit longer. Oh, I want this to take a little bit less. And as you start stretching these, pulling these back and forth, you can start getting into extending the time frame, and that's truly then over here changing the dates as we drag it. So it was from 8.1 to 8.8. I just took it to 8.14. So you do have this nice little Gantt chart to be able to get it to do what you're thinking you want it to do.
And did you see the second part of Cameron's
I did,
question?
but go ahead.
Cameron, at the second part, just as a reminder, he asks, is there a way to access Navisworks Gantt charts online? And what he responded was, could you view a Navisworks Gantt chart on, say, Autodesk 360 or a tablet app, or can you link the Gantt chart to something like Google Calendar?
I know you can start accessing this stuff through BIM 360. That's an expensive answer to the question. I do believe you can also access NWD files. So when you're done here, you can save it as an NWD file. Then I believe you can access the NWD file through Autodesk 360. I can't remember for sure. I know there's an app that you can see the NWD files, but I also don't know if Autodesk eliminated it when they came out with BIM 360. So I'm not 100% sure on that question.
Yeah, BIM 360 is a very cool program, but it's a
very expensive program.
Pretty expensive proposition.
Okay, so that's how you can start accessing that through timelines, etc. So you can use those search sets for timeline. You can use them for selecting things. And again, you start thinking about this process and you start linking it all together. Yeah, as an architect, I'm not going to be as great as a construction person in my dates, etc., etc. But if I just want to give a pretty animation to my client on here's roughly how it's going to be built, I can start accessing any information out of the Revit model. Again, talking Revit here. So if I go back to the Element tab, it's even using phasing. So I can come up with phase creatives. You've got phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. I can say, hey, find walls on phase 1, find doors on phase 1. I can start doing sub-searches of walls for phase 1 and just build it up quickly to get that done. So nice part is next project, boom, I go to town. Just make sure your projects are saying phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, not new, existing. Just make sure you've got consistent from project to project.
Before we leave Timeliner here, Brian, Derek asks, in Timeliner, can you break up geometry yet, like, in parentheses, like different concrete pours, or does the geometry need to be modeled like you want to see it in a timeline?
So yes and no. One of the things in the file reader for Revit, anyway, again, it's all about the native software, so I'm assuming you're talking the Revit world. If you were talking AutoCAD architecture, it would be broken down level by level, because that's how AutoCAD architecture is, but your concrete floors would not be. So there's a couple different ways to do this. One of the things in your options for your file readers in a Revit world, and the Revit file reader, you can say break it up by levels. So instead of a wall spanning 10 floors, it can break those walls up into a floor by floor, level by level scenario. You do have to be careful with that. If you have intermediate levels, like I know I've been in some architects' models, there's like 5 levels per floor, then it's going to break it up and you're going to get a whole lot of slices, usually why I leave that unchecked. The other scenario for you, instead of doing floors, in Revit you can divide floors into parts, and then in Navisworks it will see those parts, again in the file reader as long as you say convert parts. So I could then say, hey, go turn all floors off and use parts in lieu of them, so I could start breaking those parts that I've modeled in Revit as my pours and bring those into Navisworks. So yes, it has to come from the authoring software for the most part, and it's garbage in, garbage out type scenario. If you want that wall to show phases of the wall, then you're going to have to model it 6 separate walls. So yes, that definitely starts to happen in there. No way to divide it up, etc. It's all just coming from the authoring software. Okay, so last thing, I've got 5 more minutes. What I did want to just briefly get into is the clash detective. So a couple things inside of here as well. A lot of times for me using Navisworks Manage, I don't actually import any of the sets And you'll see why here in a minute. I've got the sets created, but what I do is I import a clash test. So I have the clash test pre-set up, and I can just say open. And if your clash test is based off of search sets, it'll bring it in, and boom, it'll start using those exact same search sets to do the clash test. The problem here is if I bring it in and they're already in there, it then does a duplicate. So for me, with all my clients, I open up Navis Manage, I import the clash test, it brings in all the search sets, I bring in my CSV, now I've got my timeliner linked to those search sets for clash tests. So I do want to point that out when you get into this, is if you've already got a search set and you import another one, it duplicates it. So I just wanted to point that out. So normally I wouldn't have brought them in first. What's great about that is I've got pre-built rules set up. So if I come in here and look, you know, a lot of people think I'm crazy, but I check architectural handrails to doors. I want to make sure I don't have handrails going through doors. That's an internal check. It's not a contractor check. That's what I use as the architects I work with. Are you modeling correctly? Kind of like, are there any handrails going through the floors? Oops, you put a floor, or you don't have a floor for the, you know, handrail, etc. But by importing this, what's really cool is now I can just say, hey, go update all these, and I can run every single clash inside of here. So I import my clash test based on Revit categories for my search set. Again, for using AutoCAD, it'd be based on AutoCAD layers for those MEP people out there using AutoCAD MEP. And now I can just come through and say, I have 4 handrails going through doors. Oops. And I can just cruise through this and see all of the different clashes I'm going to have in my model that quickly. So where I was saying this morning, I set up 5 buildings with clashes with, I didn't do timeline for this client, but with all my clashes all done, it's open up all the models, append when need be, import the clashes, run the sets, boom, there's my clashes of the model. So using the search sets in relation with Clash Detective, Timeliner, or just for simple ease of turning things on and off in the model, they're invaluable.
Now, just as a reminder, the clash detection is available in the Navisworks Manage version of Navisworks, and the Navisworks Manage version can be bought standalone, but you're really better off price-wise to get it in one of the Ultimate suites, Building Design Suite Ultimate or the Infrastructure Suite Ultimate. It's available in the Plant Suites and so forth, Inventor Suites, etc., etc. But you can still do visual clash detection by doing fly-throughs in Simulate or walk-throughs in Simulate and just kind of looking around. The advantage of Manage is obviously it's going to find those both hard and soft collisions for you automatically, and that's a big plus. But whether it's worth another $5,000 or $6,000 to you is a whole nother question.
The point on it is too is you guys have Navisworks Simulate. You know, start using this to get into using, etc. And I know I'm going to go over my time now, so if you guys need to leave, feel free to leave. But there's this great tool in here that I always talk about. I always get the question is, how can I tell what so-and-so changed in the model? If I'm an architect, what the engineer changed. If I'm an engineer, what the architect changed. What they changed in the last version of the Revit model. So I'm going to start a new project since there's no more questions. And I'm going to go ahead and open. And I'm going to have to browse to a different location because I did this as a presentation.
Doug, I do see your question. We'll get to it in a second here.
Let's go.
Well, while you're looking for that, Doug, you know, one of the things that we struggle with here quite often is books, just because the technology seems to change so fast anymore that it's hard to find a good book that's not out of date by the time that, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, the principles of the books, the principles behind the software stay fairly consistent, even if the features change from time to time. Now, I do not remember the name of the book, but the author is a gentleman by the name of Jason Dodds, worked for Autodesk, one of the foremost experts on Navisworks. If you look it up for Jason Dodds, go to Amazon and do a author search or something like that for Jason Dodds. I'm sure you'll find it, and I do have your email here, so I'll try and find the answer to the book name. He's done some instructing for us. He actually lives here in Denver, Jason does, and so that's probably one of the best I've seen. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Brian?
No, pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
Just, that's, I think, the only one I've seen out there, too. It's not
really is.
And I don't even know if he's updated it for 14 and 15.
I don't know either, but the principles stay pretty much the same, even if the buttons are.
Yeah, it won't get into the quantification workbook, which is added in 14 and 15. So the one thing I want to show everybody real quickly is, so I'm going to say I've got the architect, or I've got two models. I've got the old version of the architect's model and the new version of the architect's model. Right? I'm just going to open them together. So if you've got both models, hopefully you've got a date after one, etc. I'm going to open both of those models together because you're going to see looks exactly the same in my mind. Oh, maybe I can see something that's going on over here. Okay, this is one of the best features, and yes, this can be done in Navisworks Simulate. On the Home tab, not the Home tab. Is it the Home tab? I always forget what this is. I think they changed it. Nope. So what I have to do is open up my selection tree, and I have to pick both models. Then on my Home tab, there's this tool over here called Compare. I click it. You can play with the different fields and what you want to do over here. I'm just going to say OK. And they might not be lined up exactly. Nope. So you can see that everything in red, it turned off everything that didn't change, and everything in red did change. So it turns off and highlights in the model what did change. I probably had an issue with the floor height. I think I changed one of my floor-to-floor heights, as well as the fact I moved this wall. So notice how I'm going to undo, I think I can undo all that. I'm going to undo that all again and just do it again. I'm going to grab this file and this file. I'm going to hit compare. And there's a whole lot of different things inside of here. So do you want to find different types, different path, different geometry, if the material's been changed, if the transform's been changed? What are you really looking for inside of here? Did the type change, etc.? So different properties that it's looking for. And then how do you want to see it? Do you want to hide things that match? Do you want to highlight results? So you'll basically see the heart and soul of what's happening here is it's creating selection sets for you. So this caps off all of my things on the sets. Again, I'll just say OK. And what happens if I now switch this from trees to sets, it's created a plethora of different sets and said, oh, these are the ones that are different. These are the two sets that it created that are different. Everything else is just parts that it used to hide it and say that it's the same. So just by looking at it right there, there's something in this that changed. Now granted, there's a whole lot here because I think I changed the entire level on this. But if it had just been one or two or three walls, what I thought I was going to get was just this. It just highlights this wall. And then ironically, not only does it highlight that wall, it does this wall as well as this wall, because guess what? Those walls change too, and then it usually keeps the floors. So depending on how that model was set, you bring them both in. If it's the same model, then boom, it just highlights those two things and says, hey, FYI, this is what's changed. So no longer the time-awaited question of how do I tell what so-and-so changed? Navisworks Compare. It takes 9 clicks to compare an old model to a new.
Navisworks really is one of the the cool products, and one of the ones that most people don't know they have. So I hope this gave you a little bit of a foundation into how you can use this better and better. We have Navisworks classes that we can run here at CAD-1, and I know that Brian through BD Mackey Consulting also does Navisworks consulting and kind of orientation training. So get a hold of either one of us. And Brian, do you have anything else you want to share right now?
Nope, that is pretty much all I had.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time today. Hopefully this was helpful to you. It will be recorded and up on the CAD-1 YouTube page probably within a week or so. So anyway, we appreciate your time today, and we will talk to you in the next webinar coming up soon. Thanks very much. Goodbye.